Ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers, my name is Danilo Lubkivsky, and I'm glad to welcome you on behalf of the Kyiv Security Forum. Russia is holding a parade in the Red Square, but it doesn't commemorate the millions of victims of the Second World War. Putin celebrates what he thinks is Russia greatness. By that, he radiates the desire to restore the international significance of declining Russia, and, by the way, its threat to others. It means strength in his mind. They celebrate, but they also fear. They fear the outside world. They fear the wrongdoings of their history. They are afraid to lose the very grounds of trust in self-proclaimed greatness. Fear makes them justify the aggressiveness of their history. It makes them disrespect freedom and independence of others. It makes them even justify the war against Ukraine. 4,000 murdered people, occupied Crimea and Donbass, devastated lands of ruined lives, hopes, and future. Everyday killings of the Ukrainian defenders. This is exactly what their march in the Red Square is about. What to do with Russia? This is a basic question to be discussed today at our online event, the online event of the Kyiv Security Forum. How to elaborate the efficient strategy of Russia's containment and coexistence, and on the other hand, how not to become Russia ourselves. These questions have no simple answers. For that, I'm proud and I will discuss these issues with our distinguished panelists. And now I would like to introduce our guests. Secretary Victoria Nuland, a famous American diplomat, senior counselor at the Albright Stonebridge Group and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings institution. Secretary Nuland served in the United States State Department from 1984 to 2017, including as ambassador to NATO and as the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. Thank you, Secretary Nuland, for joining us. Omid Nouripour, a German politician of the Alliance 90, the Greens, the member of the German Bundestag. He is his party's spokesperson on foreign affairs and the member of the Committee of Foreign Affairs. I thank you, Mr. Nouripour, for being with us and for accepting our invitation. I'm really happy to introduce Natalia Popovych, a well-known Ukrainian expert and activist, the co-founder of Ukraine Crisis Media Center and the founder of the One Philosophy Group. Thank you, Natalia, for being with us. Ambassador Kostyantyn Yeliseev, Ukrainian diplomat, the former Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, former Ambassador of Ukraine to the European Union, and the diplomatic advisor to the President of Ukraine in 2015 and 19. Thank you, Ambassador Yeliseev, for being with us. And finally, I'm really happy to see here the chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum and the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Thank you, Arseniy, for being with us for this important discussion. More than a week ago, the Foreign Affairs magazine published a comprehensive article by Secretary Nuland about the relationship with Russia. Toria, you made many deep and important observations in your analysis. Not mentioning all of them, I will point out a few. On the one hand, you say, I quote, Putin has played a weak hand well because the United States and its allies have led him. Over the past 12 years, Putin and his cronies have paid a relatively small price for their actions, end of quote. On the other hand, you suggest that in relations with Russia, the United States should couple a strong defense with an open hand if the relationship improves. So this is about the balance, but how to calibrate that balance, how to find this equilibrium? And is it possible even to find the balance, the equilibrium with the aggressor, with the person whose hands are in blood? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Danilo. It's great to be here at the Kyiv Security Forum with all of my Ukrainian and European friends. I want to hope that everybody is doing as well as possible in these very turbulent times and staying healthy. I think the most difficult thing for many of us who are in the diplomatic business and in the foreign policy business is that we can't travel these days. We can't come and see each other and really exchange views. But this is as good an alternative as we can find. So thank you for inviting me. The point of this piece is that we have failed over the last 20 years as a democratic community led by the United States in staying unified and in putting sufficient resources and attention against the threats that the Putin regime was causing to all of us. Nobody knows that better than Ukrainians. We were able to marshal a significant package, an unprecedented package of transatlantic and global sanctions in response to Crimea and to Donbass, but we were not able to sustain that policy in a way that increased the cost for Putin for not coming to the table and negotiating seriously on the implementation of the very deal, the Minsk Accords, that he himself signed to get out of Ukraine. So that's just one example of the lack of unity, the lack of focus, the lack of sustainment that we as a democratic community have had in response to the various threats, not simply territorial expansion, but also threats to our democratic systems, use of cyber weapons against our infrastructure, killing his opponents on our territory, building new and dangerous weapons, falling out of arms control treaties, etc., violating them and lying about it. So the question becomes, how do we restore unity? How do we restore focus? How do we restore strength and make it cost Putin when he threatens our security? But at the same time, it is not in any of our interest to make a permanent enemy of Russia or the Russian people. The best case scenario would be if Russia were to take a Ukrainian path, to be trying to be more democratic, more free, more open, a better neighbor, less corrupt. So that's a Russia that would be a good neighbor and a good partner for all of us. So we need to leave the door open for that. And we also need to make it clear the benefits for Russia itself, particularly now that Russians are increasingly questioning whether they are continuing to benefit from Putin's leadership internally. When you ask them that great Reagan-esque question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Increasingly, they're saying no. So how do we exploit that tension inside Russia, the fact that Putin has been a big adventurer externally, but he has failed to increase the quality of life for his own people. He's failed to invest in his own country. And in fact, the Ukrainian model is a threat to his governance system inside Russia, which is why he's so concerned about your success. How do we speak to the Russian people themselves and say it doesn't have to be like this, we don't even want it to be like this. Americans don't, Ukrainians don't, Europeans don't. And here are the kinds of benefits that you could have. And I believe that we should put those benefits, whether they're economic, trade agreements, etc., whether they're in human terms, increased opportunities for travel and study with us for young Russians, we should put them in the shop window, as the Germans liked to say in the Ukrainian context, and show not only Putin and his cronies what a better way, but the Russian people a better way, and make it clear that our interest is in stronger relations, not weaker relations, but not at the price of our own security.
I thank you, Toria, for this answer. While we discuss it, we remember that President Putin himself has already started talking to the West and talking to the Western societies and to his own society. On June 18, Putin published his, as he calls it, the real lessons of the Second World War peace in the national interest. This peace is supposed to be a big manifesto. The Kremlin authors and ghostwriters worked hard to incorporate it into it many skillful techniques and new dividing lines. But what Putin says? Putin, first of all, he declares that the Second World War was caused by all major international actors except the Soviet Union. Secondly, he says that the victory belongs to all great powers, and he names all these powers: the United States, United Kingdom, China. He mentions China and France. But there is only one role which is exceptional. This is the role of literally, not even the Soviet Union, but Russia. And thirdly, he promises that he would continue spreading this narrative. And the most important premise of President Putin is his claim that Russia has a legitimate right to demand of being recognized again as a Big Three member, a winner. For that, Putin wants to gather P5, permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, or Big Five, and, I quote, to develop collective principles in world affairs. He concludes, we can trust each other and must do so. In other words, he says, trust me or I will kill my neighbor. How do you like it, Mr. Prime Minister? How do you like it, Mr. Prime Minister Yatsenyuk? This is the question to you.
It's great to have you, everyone, at this online panel. So wish you all the best and stay healthy. Here is the thing. You just mentioned that Putin started to talk to the Western audience. And let me put it bluntly. Putin propaganda machine is more efficient in reaching out to the Western audience rather than Western audience can reach out to the Russian audience. And this is one of the biggest problems. The reason why Putin decided to write this so-called article, I would label this article as back to the USSR in Putin's interpretation. It's very simple. The history of the past is a clear bedrock, and this is the most important bedrock and the pillar of Putin's regime. He believes that he can build up the future, staying just on some kind of historic interpretations he is convinced about. In this article, for example, for me, that's nothing new. I've had all this narrative for at least 18 years as Putin is in power. He wants to consolidate his swath of electorate and the Russian people with a very clear message that, look, it is the West who collaborated with Nazis. That's what he actually wrote in his article. It's not Stalin and Hitler who actually waged the war against the world. And they triggered the Second World War with Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. No, it's due to the deception, collusion, and conspiracy theory that Putin is trying to invent of the Western powers. Then he says, look, my fellow Western friends, I forgive you. It's we, the Soviet Union, who won the Second World War, not Ukrainians. And he was very clear a few years ago saying that, look, Russia would have won the Second World War without Ukraine. So he tried to humiliate Ukrainians who lost 10 million people fighting for our independence and fighting for the free world and fighting against Nazis with the Soviets and allied forces, with the United States, with the United Kingdom. So we did it together. And last but not least, the most important message that Putin wraps up his article with is that, look, we need to substitute G7 with P5. This is his ultimate goal. And I, as the Russian president, want to block everything using my veto power. this is another idea that he launches and that he tries to deliver to the Western audience. So what's on the table? First of all, I want to be very clear that Putin article about the Second World War is a false claim. This is lie and deception. This is the truth he only believes in, and this is not the reality. And it's very important for all of us to understand. We have to defend the truth. We have to defend the facts. And we need to be very open and to talk to our nations and to tell that, look, it's we who defended the world, it's we who won in the Second World War, it's we who suffered, it's we who defeated Nazis, and it's we who will build up the future, not with the archaic approaches, outdated approaches of Putin, but we will build up modern future based on free values and real facts, evidences, and truth.
I thank you, and let me immediately pick up what Mr. Prime Minister said about this P5 idea. It looks like this is the most important part of this article. Putin simply uses the sufferings, the idea of sufferings of millions of people to say that there are some big powers that have a legitimate right to decide how the humankind has to move forward. And first he suggests that Russia belongs to this very narrow club. And that's interesting. And my next question goes to Mr. Nouripour. In his article, President Putin never mentions Germany as a possible partner to develop, as he says, collective principles in world affairs. In his vision of reality, what we understand from his article, Berlin, the contemporary modern Berlin, is far from even being someone who should be invited to the real table of interlocutors. Why do you think he neglects the current international role of Germany, of India, of many other nations that have strong influence upon the international relations? Don't you find that this is exactly a true answer of President Putin to the illusions of those in Germany and Europe who call to appease him and to meet his demands? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much for having me and giving me the opportunity to have a discussion with such a panel of experts, and good to see so many friends again. Obviously, he's trying to divide us. Obviously, he's trying to divide, in this special case, France and Germany, because France is the only EU member who's mentioned there. But obviously, EU is playing a huge role when it comes to containing Russian aggression in Europe, and of course helping Ukraine. Could be definitely more, but it's obvious that Mr. Putin tries to shift the attention more to Paris. And to be honest, one of the reasons for that is that the president of France in the past had delivered a couple of quotes which could be misunderstood when it comes to Russia. It's now clear, but we had after Mr. Macron referring to the friendship to Russia and that terrorism is the problem and not Russia. This is a quote he delivered. We had a Normandy format, and there was no division between Germany and France. So everything is good, but obviously they just go on with that. Second, when you rely your narrative on history, and in this case on a totally wrong path of history, because history obviously brings a lot of responsibility for Germany when it comes to Russia, but even not only to Russia, but also to the other countries who being Soviet Union then. And we know that the major sufferers of the Feldzug of the German Wehrmacht in the east of Europe has taken place in Kyiv. We know that 500,000 people just has been killed because they tried to defend Kyiv. We know that in Babin Yar, next to, which is now a part of of Kyiv, German SS killed 32,000 people, mainly Jewish people, in 48 hours. So when we talk about our historical responsibility, it's not about Russia alone. Of course, we have a historical responsibility when it comes to Russia, but it's also about Ukraine, it's about Belarus, it's about Moldova, it's about the Baltic states, and so on and so on. And when he realized his narrative on history and his way of telling history, Germany is not part of it, because, you know, saying that they suffered and they won the war, and Russia and China won this World War II. There is no place for Germany anymore, and this is something which we have to tell to our public, not only but also in Germany, massively. And we definitely have a duty. And I can tell you, as a chairman of the German-Ukrainian Friendship Group in the German Bundestag, that we are trying to do that all the time. We have a duty to tell to the German public that our responsibility is including Russia, but not excluding Ukraine.
I thank you. Why we spend so much attention to the piece written by the Kremlin authors and signed by President Putin is because we clearly see that this narrative is aimed at dividing us. And for that, we have to react. In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski said that in Eurasia Center, the area between an enlarging Europe and a regionally rising China will remain a political black hole until Russia firmly redefines itself as a post-imperial state. There is a lot of truth in these words. And my question goes to Ambassador Yeliseev. For many years, the West has been encouraging Russia a lot. At the end, all the efforts, unfortunately, resulted in the ongoing Russian offensive, or ongoing Russia's aggression against Ukraine, against Georgia, against Moldova, neighbors, and the West. Do you believe in any kind of reset with Putin's Russia? And if not, what is your assessment of further perspectives in terms of Ukraine-led peace process and our collective with the West collective security system? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to this very interesting and encouraging discussion. I am very happy to see here Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, Victoria. We didn't see each other for many, many years, and all other participants, and Natalia as well. Great to see you. Danila, first of all, look, Putin has his own revanchist agenda, and he will use all the opportunities, reset, wars, epidemics, election, etc., to implement it. So that's why at this point, I doubt that the West can really reset relations with Putin. And here, I can agree with Victoria on key existential goals of Russian president, which is to restore, I quote, Russia's greatness, territories, and power. And he will try to do it till the very end, no doubt. And just look at the recent article, since we are discussing it, or recent interview of yesterday. And Putin, for example, warns the world that, for example, Russia is going to restore all territories lost after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Or Russia is ready to sit at the Yalta II negotiation table to divide the world among great powers. Or Russia is ready to escalate its confrontation with the West, etc., etc. It's evident that Putin's Russia is gaining its power from the past, not from the future. And the glory of the past is the glory of war, bloodshed, glory of repression, and the glory of territorial expansion. And unfortunately, as of today, the Putin's Russia is not effectively countered. And each of us, let's be open and frank, each of us has its own share of responsibility for this failure. Let's tell me frankly, every US, French, German, or even Ukrainian president is trying to make reset of relations with Russia. And in the end, everybody is failed. but the precious time is lost and Putin is gaining more and more. Moreover, there is no consistency both in words and actions towards Russia. As an example, Putin is invited back to G7 table, and at the same time, Putin's Trojan horse, Nord Stream 2, is targeted with sanctions. Or another example is G7 Hiroshima Leaders Declaration of the year 2016, where G7 leaders agreed to take further restrictive measures in order to increase cost on Russia should its actions so require. Aggression is ongoing, but the scope of sanctions is the same. And as regards Ukraine, we are still struggling against Russian aggression, and I would like to tell you more. Today, Russia shoots not only in the touch line in Donbass. Today, Russia also shoots in Kyiv through tools of hybrid war. And since we are talking about Donbass, since the last Normandy summit in Paris in December, there has not been any single day of ceasefire, and Ukraine has not stopped taking more losses, unfortunately. It's a tragedy. It's not excluded that Moscow may try a military intervention from Crimea. Russia, as already Victoria mentioned, keeps ignoring the Minsk arrangements and is trying to impose its own agenda. And the goal of Russia is to return the occupied territories of Donbass to Ukraine on the basis of the principle of federalization, which is big danger. And it is highly unlikely that Putin will agree on any compromises on this agenda. So the legitimate question, what should we do in order to help the settlement of the situation in Donbass tract? Let me be very concise. Number one, there is no better strategy in dealing with Russia than showing strength and unity. We must be firm and clear in our messages to Kremlin and consistent in our actions vis-à-vis Putin. No appeasement, no unconditional return to business as usual. Secondly, political and economic sanctions on Russia must be strengthened. They will keep Russia from further invading Ukraine and keep Putin sitting at the negotiation table. Thirdly, return to the idea of deployment of UN peacekeeping operation in Donbass. Fourthly, keep building upon military resilience in Ukraine, including supplying defensive lethal weapons, naval military system, anti-air and helicopter forces. It is important that the US do not revise the policy towards Ukraine. The next point on geopolitical track, the most painful sanction against Putin and the cheapest one for the Western allies are to grant Ukraine with a membership action plan in NATO and the European Union membership perspective. Huge incentive for reforms and development of Ukraine, and at the same time, the huge blow for Putin's aggressive and revanchist policies to bring back Ukraine to the Soviet Union.
Thank you, Excellency. You formulated what I believe are the principles not only for the Donbass solution or Crimea solution, occupied territory solution, but the overall policy towards Russia. And my next question goes to Natalia Popovych. President Putin fights and wages the war for minds. However, unfortunately, Russians often miscalculate when it comes to Ukraine. The United States and the European Union are ranked by Ukrainians as the undisputed leaders among our strategic allies. A referendum of Ukraine's accession to NATO may win an absolute majority of 60 or 70%, it depends on different polls. The number of the citizens, of the Ukrainian citizens with pro-Western views dominate in our country. What do you think? Can these popular moods be skillfully reversed should our authorities fail to protect our information security and Russia's agents gain final control over Ukraine's media? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Danilo. And it's a great honor to participate in this panel to discuss the critical importance of what to do about our Eastern Northern aggressive neighbor. I believe that defending Ukraine's information space continues to be very critical for the resilience of the Ukrainian society as the foremost of freedom and democracy on the border with Russia. Russia truly has difficulty recognizing the influence of Ukraine on the inception of Russia as a state, and believes that by belittling Ukraine's historical memory, our losses, or our future prospects, it can keep Ukraine in the orbit of influence. As we refer to this article by President Putin in the national interest, I'm just going to give you a few facts of the quantitative analysis of it, because it comes as a response to the fact that in the recent years, there is a predominant opinion in the Western media. We studied recently over 6 countries in Europe and their conclusions on the Second World War. And it is only Russia now that considers its wing to be its own, because everybody else already has the consensus of accepting the Second World War as a tragedy and not as this glorious impact of the Great Patriotic War it continues to be for the Russian mindset and President Putin. So this is a very unusual format of the article. It is 9,000 words, and it more resembles the Cannon's long telegram of 1946 quoted by Tory in her piece. And really, it's the revisionism as its base. Modern Russia does not seem to be as important as the Soviet Union, which is necessary to be kind of resurrected in the minds. The word Soviet Union is mentioned 49 times in this article. The world seems to be at the wage of new war, and President Putin implies that it's possible to avoid it if there could be compromises reached on the Ukrainian or other questions or issues in case, as Arseniy had mentioned, G7 can become P5 and there could be compromises reached through that. The current realities from the point of view of Mr. Putin, they resemble the situation of 1938-39, when the West is going to do the same as it did in that period of time. Could we really count on the continuance of this great solidarity and resolve by the Western allies to make sure that all of the countries on the border with Russia are more resilient and in their information space, which is being attacked on a daily basis, not only by the Russian proxies, but we know that some of the TV channels that will be broadcasting this discussion and others in Ukraine, many of them unfortunately have pro-Russian agenda during the war in Ukraine, while, as some of you have mentioned, the ceasefire had never taken place. This article is de facto a red card for the West and the United States and United Kingdom, France and Poland for Russia to resurrect its sphere of influence. And the fact that Ukraine, neither Baltic states are mentioned properly in this article to mention their interest and their resolve in the war only tells us that the future, including in information space, we need to be very, very careful. The accent can be made on the fact that there will be many Russian resources more poured not only into the national level TV broadcasters, but also the regional ones, especially in lieu of the local elections in Ukraine. We already see the intensification of the pro-Russian narratives in the Ukrainian media, and this active period between 9th of May and now the end of June, as Ukraine has been undergoing heavy desovietization, decommunization in the current years. There is a big concern that these efforts would be reversed, while the only resolution that we could see to these revisionist, not only articles, but all of the efforts of the Russian Federation in energy, economy, policy, security, and also information space can actually only be resolved by what Mr. Cannon had said, much depends on the health and vigor of our own society. If we can make our information spaces more secure, if we can make our civil society yet more resilient, if we can add up to the energy of that resilient character and moral backbone of countries like Ukraine, the Baltic states, on the edge of Russia stronger, this is our only chance to build that cohesive future that Tori had described in her approach.
I thank you, Natalia, for your remarks. Secretary Nuland, in her article, says that Ukraine is another battlefield for democracy that the United States must not cede to Putin. I cannot agree more. Putin, unfortunately, has not changed a single element of his position since 2014 or other years. And for that, my next question goes to Secretary Nuland. Your Excellency, the Minsk process continues to be in deadlock. It doesn't lead to any kind of solution. What do you think is necessary now to move the peace process forward? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Danilo. First, just to say, I can appreciate why a nostalgic piece full of falsehoods by Putin in the national interest is obsessing Kyiv, but it's not obsessing Washington. I don't think anybody even noticed. And the notion that we would choose the P5 as the governance table for world affairs is absurd, given the fact that Russia and now China are blocking all efforts that the free nations put forward. It's a transparent effort to make the world safe for autocracy and to buddy up with China and to gain status that Russia hasn't earned at the global table. Not to mention, as everybody else has said, to divide us and to exclude Germany, the leader of Europe, India, the major countries of Africa and Latin America. So, you all may be obsessed, but nobody here is. We are obsessed instead with whether we are going to choose to go back to our traditional post-war role of organizing, leading, and strengthening the resources and resolve of the free world in increasing prosperity and freedom and security for all of us, and blocking and tackling those nations who would use terror, occupation, intimidation, etc., to gain territory or to exploit the weaknesses of others. So, it is Putin who's made the choices not to join a freer, more prosperous world. And it is he who has excluded his own citizens from the potential of a greater and stronger economic future, a freer future, a future where Russia is not a pariah state. So back to Ukraine. Look, I think that I don't see a route to getting Russia out of Ukraine other than the document that Putin himself signed while Putin is in power. So the question is, how do we hold him to his own commitment to get out of Ukraine if those territories of the Donbass can have, or get out of eastern Ukraine, if those territories of the Donbass can have devolved power? The irony of Minsk now is that the Ukrainian Rada has already given those devolved powers to all of the rest of Ukraine. So in fact, what's on offer for Donbass is the same status as the rest of Ukraine now enjoys in terms of local judiciary, local policing, etc. But none of this is possible if Ukraine and or the international community on Ukraine's behalf can't regain control of the external border so that Russia can't continue to destabilize and refuel the conflict. So I believe that unless and until we get into a serious negotiation about the implementation of Minsk, our sanctions on Russia need to steadily increase. There needs to be a 6-month opportunity for Russia to come to the table, after which sanctions should get tougher. If Russia stalls at the table, sanctions should get tougher still. I also think that the United States should be a direct party to these negotiations, given our strength vis-a-vis Russia and given our ability to unify the free world if we are willing to play that leadership role. So I would hope that we would be invited by everybody to be part of that, if and when the United States comes back to making Ukraine a central front for democracy, as I hope we will after our election in November. But it has to hurt for Putin to just sit there. Otherwise, he will just sit there. But I think there's also an important question for Ukraine. Somewhere along the line, I'm not sure where, Ukrainians in the rest of the country have become too fearful of the people of Donbass. And I frankly think that they cannot be dominated by Russia if that border is closed, and if they are afforded the opportunity to live more freely, more justly, and more prosperously as the rest of Ukraine is now seeking to do. And if they enjoy the same rights of local autonomy that the rest of Ukraine has. So the focus needs to be on getting Russian troops and weapons back across the border, getting international control or Ukrainian control, ideally, of the external border, and then beginning the hard work of Ukrainian and Ukrainian conversation about the future of Donbass and how to rebuild it in a way that looks more like Lviv and Kyiv and less like Rostov.
I thank you, Taria. Along with these important thoughts and remarks, let me also quote what you wrote in your article, that you believe that the first order of business, if to change the things in the international arena, the first order of business is to restore the unity of alliances in Europe and Asia. And for that, my next question goes to Mr. Nouripour. Do you agree? Would you be so kind to share with our audience your opinion how to narrow the opportunities for Russia's political incursions in Europe and Germany? And before resetting a dialogue with Moscow, can we reset the dialogue in the West itself? The floor is yours.
I fully agree, and I just can say that we have to tackle misinformation on another level. It's not only about history. We can see it in these COVID days, when there are people who spread dangerous conspiracy theories on the virus, calling out that people should come together, hug each other, and have a demonstration. You can see an announcement of the demonstration on the website of Sputnik or Russia Today, just spreading the message that these people are coming together. This is what we call classic hybrid warfare, and we have to talk about it in that way. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, which is not a civil war, I see too many of my colleagues talking about a civil war, which is not a cold war because people are dying day by day there. It's about how to frame it, and it's our job to do that very accurately, to tackle the misinformation from the other side. This is part of resetting the dialogue within the West. But I think the most important priority for Germany, for Ukraine, and for deterring Russia is keeping the European Union together. That means to get rid of national interests which are harming other people's national interests within the EU and within our partners. One of them is Nord Stream. I fully agree with that. But what I just heard, this is why we definitely, as me personally, I definitely am not endorsing the sanctions coming from the United States, because they are harming us much more than the case of the pipeline itself. But I fully agree that this pipeline is a huge mistake, harming the sovereignty of not only the countries in between, how they called it, in the past, unfortunately, but also harming Germany's interest to keep the European Union together, which is and should be the major one. But just one last issue when it comes to history. There is this huge number of lies about history we heard for the last 1 or 2 years. Or even longer. One of them is that Hitler and Stalin had to come together because of Polish propaganda, which is a crazy thing to say, but they spread it. The Russian side is spreading it all the time. Leads me to the point that we definitely need better cooperation between Ukraine, Germany, and then Poland. And of course, it's about Poland to brought in all the time. I know that there are a couple of tensions between Ukraine and Poland also. I think this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is how to contain Russia in these days. And the last thing I want to mention is when it comes to deterrence, it's obvious to watch what the other side is afraid of, and this is European integration. This is not about nukes. This is not about Russian military played a very well role on deterring us by bringing a submarine to the Haven Bay of Stockholm for 5 minutes. The next 2 years, the entire Scandinavian countries are talking about Russian threat, and then Russia is coming. But they're afraid of the GDP of Poland and how it has changed from 1990 on to today, which is the 6th time of that what they had during the end of the Cold War. So European integration first is, I think, the most important slogan in these days, because there is a reason why the Russian interference in the way we know it today in Ukraine started with the negotiations of Ukraine with the European Union. So we have to keep the European Union together, and we have invited our friends to come in and to talk about how to bring European integration and it benefits to our friends in Ukraine also. I think this is the thing Moscow is afraid of the most.
I thank you, and especially I thank you for mentioning Poland and for mentioning the idea of having a trilateral dialogue between Germany, Poland, and Ukraine. I would actually add France to that, and I believe that the Kyiv Security Forum one day will focus its attention on this matter, and we will have a special panel and discussion on this. So thank you very much for this input. And now I turn to Ambassador Yeliseev. Russia sets a lot of anti-examples to what we believe is good. The rule of law, the fight against corruption, in my opinion, are the matters of our national security. These days see many signs of very worrying signs in Ukraine of the pro-Russian revanchism and the political persecution of national opposition. How dangerous you find these trends? The floor is yours.
Danila, very good question. And unfortunately, I don't have good news for you. Russia failed to pull Ukraine back by hybrid military aggression and land grabs in 2014-2019. And now Russia is trying to pull us, Ukraine, back by means of Ukraine's internal politics. Over the 5 years of fifth presidency, if I may say so, Ukraine's internal politics was safe from Russian influence, even despite continuous malign activities. The focus on, I quote, more Europe in Ukraine has proven right. As with more Europe in Ukraine, logically, there is less place for Russia in Ukraine. After all, the European path is the best safeguard of Ukraine, its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And in this regard, I fully agree with my previous colleague, my previous speaker. European success of Ukraine is the best deterrent against Russian revanche. Ukraine's struggle against the Russian aggression is not just about Ukraine. It shall make the West more proactive as regards Ukraine. Instead, as you rightly pointed out, Danila, we witness dangerous signs of backtracking in Ukraine. Integration, unfortunately, European and Euro-Atlantic strategy is not the highest priority for the current authorities. Integration with NATO has fallen to a level of enhanced opportunity program, not the membership action plan for Ukraine. And by the way, there is a huge risk that it all be settled in the EOP as substitute to the MAP. Second, then another case, Russian language is being attacked from day one. Also, there is always a room for improvement of anything. You won't hear from the present Ukrainian authorities a word for more Ukrainian language in Ukraine. Ukrainian media environment is under attack from Russian capital with Putin's proxies, like Medvedchuk having widened his informational grip of Ukrainian TV, and politically motivated prosecution are back in Ukraine. I still recall back my years of ambassadorship in Brussels, and I survived this period of time when the problem with the rule of law, problem with selective justice was very high on the Ukraine-EU agenda and the agenda between Ukraine and the United States. And unfortunately, currently, we have kind of, there is like a deja vu of Yanukovych time. And it is not yet clear whether the present authorities understand, consciously or not, they push Ukraine into Russian hands. And West shall not by shy, no silent against Ukrainians drifting. It's not late to make those process and erosion stop effectively. And the times of Yanukovych and how it all started back then are gloomy reminder of inaction and lack of resolute and firm position in support of European Ukraine. At the same time, good news is that Ukraine has a very vibrant society, which will not allow the worst case scenario happening. Bad is that any kind of social discord or uprising would lead to destabilization, which of course will be used by Russia for more territorial gains. And this is something that we shall be conscious and keep in mind and not allow it to happen. And it would be better pressuring the present Ukrainian authorities not to backtrack and stay firm on Ukraine's European, Euro-Atlantic track than to face a new Russian assault, not only against Ukraine, but against the international law and international order.
I thank you, Excellency. As we approach almost the end of our discussion, let me ask Natalia Popovych. What we hear from what Ambassador Yeliseev says, what we know from the media, and what we understand that we in Ukraine enter a very difficult political season. A lot of turbulence is all over the Atlantic as well. As the person of vision and action, as I know you, Natalia, what do you think? What is needed to have a new Ukraine's voice heard in the West and all over the globe in these uncertain times? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Danilo. I believe we need to collaborate more. I think we need all of us to collaborate more. I must say that regardless of all of these challenging perspectives, articles, attacks on the Ukrainian information space, what Ukraine has in the last 5 years is the emergence of the very important institutions, such as Ukrainian Cultural Fund, such as Ukrainian Institute with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, such as very vibrant organizations within the civil society, such as Kyiv Security Forum, Ukraine World Group, UCMC, and many other actors who have Ukraine's interest at heart and who are not going to back away. Those who will continue to defend not only Ukraine's national interests, but also who understand the importance of freedom and solidarity around freedom in the world. So I think our role is, on one hand, to ensure that our Western allies and partners have a more holistic understanding of Russia, who can look at Russia through many, many prisms and see the connection between what happens in Syria and what happens in the Arctic and what happens in Nord Stream 2 and what happens with Skripals and what happens with their visionist view of Russian history, look at it more holistically and in a complex way, but also at the same time to help our Western allies and partners in appreciating that their current prosperity, security, and sustainability really maybe depends less on such, large players as Russia, but more on the collaboration with Ukraine, with the Baltic states, with the Czech Republic, sound people in Czech Republic, Poland, and the Eastern and Central Europe, who want and can become more and more responsible members of the European and global community, because there are issues, and I think the pandemics should be very sending very clear signals to all of us. There are bigger issues around which we need to unify our efforts, and truth decay, trust decay, pandemics, the understanding and assessment of our health and education systems and how they will evolve, to what extent they will enable our voices to be heard, preempting global food crisis, demographic crisis. I mean, all of these other things should preoccupy our minds, and to that end create, even bigger collaborative platforms to create these new senses that would be unifying for the free world, and then everything else will fall through. So I think it's also a point of kind of refocusing, which has to take place in enabling and changing the narratives in the Ukrainian information space, in the society, but also through these collaborative efforts that maybe would make the problem of dealing with Russia less necessary.
Thank you, Natalia. And I'm going to invite Prime Minister Yatsenyuk to make his concluding remarks. The floor is yours.
Let me reiterate once again that we have to fight for the truth. Once President Putin praised Goebbels, you remember his quote, what he said? He said, Goebbels was a talented and gifted person. Could you imagine? But here is the thing. He actually took the experience of this kind of propaganda and applied this propaganda both to Ukraine and to the entire free world. We are losing the ground. I want to be very clear about this. The second issue. Once I had my rosy glasses. As a foreign minister, I tried to get along with Russians. It was in 2007 and 2008. For example, I expected that we had to upgrade a so-called big treaty between Russia and Ukraine. And the idea I had is to incorporate dispute settlement clause into this agreement. This is the agreement that was denounced by Russia and actually violated by the Russian Federation. They refused. And I can name you plenty of these kind of examples. The reason why I'm telling you this, the Russian agenda is completely different to the agenda that we have. I mean, Americans, Germans, Ukrainians, and the free world, completely different. The Russian agenda and Putin's agenda is to restore the Soviet Union. The Putin's agenda is to have another land grabs in Europe. The Putin's agenda is just to be the strongest autocratic leader on the European continent. He doesn't want Ukraine to succeed. That's the reason why he will never execute the Minsk deal. He can execute the Minsk deal only in Putin's reading, in the Russian translation. How to deal with Russia? And here is the thing. There are a number of voices that say, look, we need to find the compromise. I told you about my own experience. Maybe this is my fault out. Maybe I failed. But look, our both American and European friends tried to reset, reload, find the compromise. We all failed because the convictions we have are different rather than the Russians have. From the Ukrainian standpoint, it's practically impossible to find any kind of compromise with the Russian Federation. The key precondition to find, even to start the dialogue, is to get back Crimea, Donetsk, and Lugansk. This is the key precondition. Otherwise, look at the list of criminal charges against the Russian president and Russian Federation. Illegal annexation of Crimea, occupation of Donbass, occupation of Lugansk, assassination and killing of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military. So how can we get along with the country that invaded Ukraine? It is important, and that's what all participants already indicated. It is important to have a very strong leadership of the United States, of Germany, and we truly praise both the US and Germany, because we feel that you guys support and underpin Ukraine and of the entire European Union. You need to maintain the unity, to preserve the union. One of the most, I would say, challenging issues in contemporary Ukraine is to have a very strong leadership of the incumbent Ukrainian government and incumbent Ukrainian authorities. We have to be on the same page with the Western friends, and Ukrainian leaders have to realize that this is the most essential, this is the historic mission of the incumbent president and this government and this political leadership: to save Ukraine, to restore the territorial integrity, to go down the way of reforms, to be successful, to fight for our independence and to fight for our freedoms together with our European and American friends. So we need to have guts, all of us. So God bless America, the EU, and Ukraine.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost at the end of our discussion. I would like to thank all our participants for their important input. I thank Secretary Nuland for her article and for her great, strong support for Ukraine. I thank Omid Nouripour for his contribution and for his support. I thank Ambassador Yeliseev for being such a strong friend of Kyiv Security Forum and our team. And I'm happy to thank our brilliant guest, Natalia Popovych, for everything you said today that I do appreciate for your contribution. We thank you and we move on. It was Kyiv, the Kyiv Security Forum, and our mission continues. I thank you. Дякую.